Henry. You know, sometimes I say this name out loud just to make sure it still belongs to me, and not only to those papers in the drawer or the inscriptions on old postcards. 91 years is too much to remember every little detail, but quite enough to understand the main thing. We spend our lives collecting words like precious stones, but for some reason, we keep them clenched in our fists instead of simply giving them away. You're sitting here, opposite me, and I see in your eyes the same thing that was once in mine, the conviction that there is still an endless ocean of time ahead. We all think that way. We believe that the most important words, the ones that take your breath away, the ones that change destinies, must wait for some special, solemn moment. We put them off like a festive dinner set, saving them for better times, not realizing that life happens right now on an ordinary Tuesday or a quiet Saturday dinner. I often think about how much is still left inside me. Not because I wanted to hide something. Oh no, I was never a man of secrets or schemes. It was simpler and at the same time more complicated. It was a habit. The habit of thinking that tomorrow is a reliable storage place for everything that is hard to say today. We stay silent, not because we have nothing to say, but because the words seem too heavy for everyday use. We are afraid that by saying them, we will disturb something, some delicate balance that we have so carefully built over the years. You know, silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is a very cozy room, but over the years, I realized this: what we fail to say does not disappear. It does not evaporate like old perfume. It settles somewhere deep inside, becoming part of our weight, our gait, our gaze. These words grow heavier with each decade, not because they are painful, but because they accumulate. I don't want you to think that silence is a mistake or a sin, not at all. Sometimes keeping silent is also an act of love. But now, looking back at what I've lived, I see how often I waited for my time for words, not realizing that time has no obligation to wait for us. It just goes on, and we remain with our treasures clenched in our palms, wondering why they have become so heavy. I'm telling you this not to teach you how to live. Everyone has their own path and their own pauses between words. I just want you to feel this taste of the unsaid, which has now become sweeter to me than any confession. This quiet realization that we are not only our actions, but also those silent conversations we had with ourselves, never daring to let them out. I was a little over 40, that age when you no longer rush headlong, but still believe you control the speed of your movement. Alice and I were then in a period of such deep, habitual silence that is usually called stability. We knew each other so well that we could finish each other's sentences, but precisely because of that, we almost stopped starting them. It was an evening after some small, insignificant quarrel over everyday trifles. You know, the kind that leave no scars, but create a light draft in the house. We were sitting next to each other, and between us stood that invisible wall, built of pride and fatigue. I was looking at her hands. She always nervously fingered the edge of her shawl when she was worried, and at that very moment I felt such an incredible sharp tenderness toward her, the kind that only comes when you suddenly realize another person's fragility. One simple phrase was spinning in my head then: I'm so afraid of losing you, and I'm so sorry that I've become so closed off. It would have been true. It would have been that very key that could have unlocked the door to a completely different depth in our marriage. I felt these words rising to my throat. They were hot and real. If I had said them, we probably would have cried for half the night, but it would have been that cleansing downpour after which the air becomes transparent. But I kept silent. I remember weighing this choice on my inner scales. If I said it, I would have to become vulnerable. I would have to admit my weakness, my dependence on her, my fatigue from the role of the reliable support that I had chosen for myself. It seemed too complicated. It required an effort that, as it seemed to me then, I didn't have after a workday. I chose balance. I chose simply to reach out and cover her hand with mine. It was a good gesture, warm. She smiled back. The tension disappeared, and we returned to our usual safe channel. We saved the evening from drama. We preserved our calm. I convinced myself that this was maturity, not rocking the boat when it can still float. Back then, I did not consider this cowardice. On the contrary, I thought I was protecting us. Why stir up what lies deep? Why these confessions if we are already together? I sincerely believe that love is the ability to maintain order, to avoid sharp corners. Silence seemed to me a tool of preservation, not a wall. I saw that she was waiting for something more in that moment. In her gaze, there was that mute question, a half-open door I could have walked through. But I stayed on the threshold, smiling politely. I chose not to complicate things. It was so logical, so adult. We simply went to sleep, keeping our distance intact, and I fell asleep with the feeling that I had done the right thing, because tomorrow would be an ordinary day, and we both needed strength. I did not know then that every such right silence little by little cements the space between us. We didn't drift apart with scandals. We just slowly became two parallel lines that respect each other very much, but never intersect at the very core. And it wasn't a tragedy, no. It was just a quiet, safe harbor where the water never storms, but also never washes the shores as deeply as it could have. 10 years passed, then 20. That unsaid word, that confession of one's own fragility, did not disappear. It simply began to grow over with new layers, like a pearl. Only instead of shine, it became more and more matte and heavy. I noticed it in small things. There was a time when our children grew up and flew away, leaving us in a big house where every sound now had an echo. We were sitting on the terrace, and I suddenly felt that now was exactly the moment when we could finally finish saying what had begun back then near that shawl. But the words had already changed their form. Now I wanted to say not, "I'm afraid," but "Thank you for putting up with my closedness." But I stopped again. It seemed to me that it would sound like summing up, like the final credits of a film that wasn't over yet. I was protecting her again, or so I told myself. I was afraid that my sudden revelation would cause her pain. Why didn't you say this earlier? Why did we live in this half-shadow for so many years? This silence changed our distance. We became an incredibly well-coordinated mechanism. We learned to take care of each other's health, our shared finances, the garden. But between us, there always remained this sanitary zone, a territory we did not enter, God forbid, so as not to touch something living and painful. Our intimacy became restrained like old wine that no longer sparkles, only warms. It was beautiful, but in this beauty, there was a certain autumn coolness. Once, when Alice was already ill, and we both knew that there was not much time left, I was sitting by her bed. She was sleeping, and I was looking at her face, cut by wrinkles like a map of the roads we had traveled together. And at that moment, I was burned by a question that I still carry within me. Henry, did you really protect her all these years? Or did you simply protect your own comfort? Wasn't your delicacy just a convenient shield to avoid facing the real naked soul of another person? Silence is very convenient. It doesn't demand an answer. It doesn't force you to change. I hid behind concern for her peace, but perhaps I was simply afraid of the whirlwind that honest words could raise. Every time I chose silence, I added another brick to this invisible wall. We stood on opposite sides, holding hands over this wall. We were close, but we were not fully together, in the sense that happens when there are no secrets between people, even those born of love. Sometimes it seemed to me that it was already too late, that words not said in time simply spoil, like fruit that has lain too long in the pantry. I looked at her and thought, if I say this now, it will no longer be about us. It will only be about my desire to ease my own conscience before the finale. And I chose silence again. Only now it was a silence not of strength, but of quiet, humble lateness. The question of whom I was really saving with my silence remained hanging in the air of our home, becoming part of its atmosphere, just like the smell of old wood and dried flowers in vases. Now, when I am 91, I often sit like this, as I do now before you, and simply listen to the silence. It no longer seems heavy or filled with reproach. Alice left 7 years ago, and with her went the need to decide or weigh anything. Those words that I so carefully guarded remained inside me. They became part of my flesh, my memories, my very essence. I look back and understand. My life did not become worse because I did not say everything down to the last drop. Yes, we often fear that the unsaid is a failure, that it is some kind of hole in the plot of our story. But now, I see it differently. Some words are simply not meant for air. They are too delicate for sound. What I kept silent about then, near that shawl, and in all the years that followed, was not a loss of love. Perhaps it was its very form, the kind that I, Henry, could bear and give at that time. We are used to thinking that closeness is when there are no boundaries between people. But this is an illusion of the young. Boundaries always exist. And sometimes we set them ourselves, not out of coldness, but out of the desire to keep what we have within the limits we are capable of managing. I accept this. I do not try to rewrite our conversations in my thoughts. I do not shout into the emptiness what is half a century late. That would be dishonest toward the silence we shared. Perhaps true wisdom comes when you stop blaming yourself for your human weakness. We are all a little cowardly when it comes to sincerity. We are all a little like children, hiding behind the curtains of silence, hoping that we will be found and understood without words. And you know what? She understood. I am sure of this now more than ever. Her hand on my palm was her answer to my unsaid, "I'm scared." She loved me not in spite of my silence, but together with it. Sometimes, silence is not emptiness. It is a way to preserve what would be too fragile for explanations. It is a quiet happiness to know that even in our restraint, there was as much warmth as we could give each other. Life does not have to be perfect or fully spoken to be real. It simply has to be lived, with all its pauses, half-said things, and those golden threads that bind us more tightly than any confessions. I am grateful for every minute of that silence. It taught me that love is not always a loud manifesto. Sometimes it is simply presence, Simply being there when words have ended and the heart continues its quiet, endless conversation. I told you this because I see how you too sometimes clench your palms. Do not be afraid of your words, but do not be afraid of your silence either. It also has the right to exist.